Is American Thanksgiving the moment when NHL general managers finally stop lying to themselves about who their teams really are? Or is it just another arbitrary date where desperation gets rebranded as urgency? The calendar has flipped to the most scrutinized date in the NHL season, American Thanksgiving, and with it comes the cold, hard statistical reality that has haunted struggling franchises for over a decade. 67.3% of teams currently in playoff position will make the postseason, which means if you're on the outside looking in right now, your championship dreams are circling the drain, and the trade phones are ringing off the hook with the sound of panic-stricken general managers trying to salvage seasons that are slipping through their fingers like sand. 3 franchises are generating the most buzz as the trade deadline approaches, and not coincidentally, all 3 are dealing with varying degrees of organizational chaos. The Nashville Predators have become the league's biggest dumpster fire, sitting dead last and apparently willing to sell everything that isn't bolted down. The Edmonton Oilers are finally admitting that Stuart Skinner isn't the answer in net and are desperately shopping for goaltending upgrades. And the Toronto Maple Leafs continue their annual tradition of roster panic, with Brad Treliving reportedly willing to move just about anyone not named Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, or Marner. Welcome to Thanksgiving in the NHL, where the turkey isn't the only thing getting carved up. Nashville's complete organizational collapse. Everything must go. Let's start with the most spectacular implosion of the 2025-26 season. The Nashville Predators, who currently occupy the NHL's basement with a record so embarrassing that even their most optimistic fans have stopped making excuses. The Predators are 2-6-2 in their last 10 games, which would be concerning for any team but is absolutely catastrophic for a franchise that spent the offseason loading up on veteran talent in a supposed win-now push. Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea were brought in to complement an already talented core featuring Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg, and Just Saros. This was supposed to be Nashville's year to contend. Instead, they're a punchline. According to the latest reports, just about everyone is available in Nashville, which is GM speak for "we have no idea what we're doing, so make us an offer and we'll consider it." Let's break down the carnage. Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault are the obvious trade candidates. Both veterans signed as free agents specifically to help Nashville contend, and both are reportedly open to joining a contender should it reach that point. Translation: they want out, they know this season is cooked, and they're willing to waive their no-trade clauses to escape the sinking ship. Stamkos, at 34 years old, is no longer the elite goal scorer he once was, but he can still contribute on a contending team's second line and power play. Marchessault, fresh off a Stanley Cup victory with Vegas, brings playoff pedigree and offensive versatility. Both players will draw interest from teams looking to add veteran depth for a playoff push. But here's the problem. What kind of return can Nashville realistically expect? Both players are aging, both carry significant cap hits, and both are rentals unless they agree to extensions with their new teams. Nashville will be selling low on assets they bought high on just months ago, which is organizational malpractice of the highest order. Ryan O'Reilly presents a different challenge. The 33-year-old center remains a valuable two-way player, but Nashville's asking price is reportedly too high for most interested teams. This is classic seller's delusion, overvaluing your own assets because you're desperate to recoup what you paid for them, even though the market has moved on. O'Reilly will likely stay put unless Nashville drastically reduces their demands, which they probably won't do until it's too late to maximize his value. Just Saros was supposed to be the crown jewel of any potential Nashville fire sale. The elite goaltender has been one of the league's best for years, and contending teams would theoretically line up to acquire him. But his recent struggles have complicated matters significantly. When your starting goalie is part of the reason you're in last place, his trade value plummets. Teams aren't going to give up premium assets for a goaltender who's currently posting below average numbers on a terrible team. Nashville is stuck. They need to move Saros to maximize their return, but they can't move him until he plays better, which might not happen on this roster. It's a catch-22 that perfectly encapsulates Nashville's organizational dysfunction. Roman Josi and Philip Forsberg are the nuclear options, the players who would draw the most interest, but are more available than ever before according to reports, with the caveat that any deals would likely happen in the offseason rather than midseason. Think about what that means. Nashville's two franchise cornerstones, the players who were supposed to be untouchable, are now potentially on the block. That's not roster management. That's organizational surrender. That's admitting that the entire project has failed and it's time to blow it up and start over. If Nashville actually moves Josi or Forsberg, it will be one of the most stunning franchise implosions in recent NHL history. These aren't depth players or aging veterans. These are legitimate stars in their prime or close to it, who should be building blocks for the future. But when you're in last place and hemorrhaging games, apparently nothing is sacred. Edmonton's goaltending nightmare. The Stuart Skinner experiment finally ends now. Let's turn our attention to Edmonton, where the Oilers are dealing with a crisis that's been years in the making. Stuart Skinner is not an NHL starting goaltender, and everyone finally seems to realize it. Tuesday's 8-3 humiliation at the hands of the Dallas Stars might have been the breaking point. When your goalie allows 8 goals and your team gets embarrassed on national television, the excuses run out. He just needs more time, arguments evaporate. He's still developing justifications ring hollow. Stuart Skinner has been given every opportunity to prove he's the guy in Edmonton, and he's failed. Repeatedly, consistently, catastrophically. According to insider reports, the Oilers have turned up the heat on their search for a new goalie, which has led to blockbuster trade talks with the Blues about Jordan Binnington and newly increased interest in Pittsburgh Penguins netminder Tristan Jarry. Let's pause and appreciate the irony here. Edmonton is so desperate for goaltending upgrades that they're considering Jordan Binnington and Tristan Jarry as solutions. Jordan Binnington is a Stanley Cup champion, yes, but he's also one of the most inconsistent goaltenders in the league. He can steal games when he's on, but he can also single-handedly lose them when he's off. His cap hit, $6 million through 2026 to 27, is substantial, and his playoff track record since 2019 has been mediocre at best. Is Binnington an upgrade over Skinner? Probably. Is he the answer to Edmonton's goaltending prayers? Absolutely not. Tristan Jarry is even more concerning. The Penguins' netminder has been one of the league's worst starting goalies this season, posting numbers that would make even backup goalies cringe. He carries a $5.375 million cap hit through 2027 to 28, which is an albatross contract for a player who's clearly lost his form. Why would Edmonton trade for Jarry? The only logical explanation is that they're so desperate for something, anything different, that they're willing to roll the dice on a reclamation project. The report notes that GM Stan Bowman wanted to play out the 2025 to 26 season without having to make such a move, but the results through 25 games have forced his hand. Translation: Bowman knew Skinner wasn't the answer, but hoped he could avoid making a difficult decision. Now, with the season slipping away and Connor McDavid's prime years being wasted, he has no choice but to act. But here's the fundamental problem. Edmonton doesn't have good options. The elite goaltenders aren't available. The mid-tier options are expensive and flawed. The reclamation projects are risky. Edmonton is essentially choosing between bad and worse, hoping they get lucky and find a goalie who can be adequate enough to not sabotage their offensive firepower. That's not a championship strategy. That's desperation with a fancy press release. Toronto's annual roster panic. Same song, different verse, and then there's Toronto, where Brad Treliving is reportedly ready to shake up everything except the core group of star forwards. This is the Maple Leafs' annual tradition. When things aren't going well, start making trades, convince yourself that different players will produce different results, and hope nobody notices that the fundamental problems never get addressed. According to reports, Morgan really has notably not been included among the untouchables, which is genuinely shocking. Really is Toronto's top defenseman, their quarterback on the power play, and one of the few players who's been with the organization through multiple iterations of this core group. If Treliving is willing to move really, it suggests one of two things. Either he's completely lost faith in the current roster construction, or he's making moves for the sake of making moves because he needs to show ownership and fans that he's doing something. Neither explanation is comforting. The more likely trade candidates are Max Domi and Brandon Carlo, which we've discussed extensively in previous reports. Both players were acquired to address specific needs. Both have underperformed, and both are now apparently expendable as Toronto tries to reshape their roster. But here's the new wrinkle: Matias Maccelli and Dakota Joshua, off-season additions who were supposed to provide depth scoring and physical presence, could already find themselves on the block, having both been healthy scratched on Wednesday night in Columbus. Let that sink in. Players who were signed just months ago are already being healthy scratched and potentially shopped on the trade market. That's not roster management, that's organizational chaos. That's a team that has no idea what it's doing, signing players without a clear plan for how they fit, and then panicking when things don't immediately work out. What kind of return can Toronto expect for Maccelli and Joshua? Probably nothing significant. They're depth players who haven't established themselves, and other teams know Toronto is desperate to move them. The Leafs will be selling at a loss, again, because they made poor acquisition decisions in the first place. The report notes that Treliving wants to shake up his roster, aside from the core group of star forwards, which is the same strategy Toronto has employed for years with zero success. They keep the expensive stars, churn through everyone else, and wonder why the results never change. Here's a radical thought: maybe the core is the problem. Maybe Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, and Marner, as talented as they are individually, don't fit together in a way that produces playoff success. Maybe the massive cap commitments to star forwards prevent Toronto from building the depth and defensive structure necessary to win championships. But Treliving won't consider that possibility, because it would require admitting that the entire organizational philosophy is flawed. So instead, he'll trade Domi, Carlo, Maccelli, Joshua, and whoever else, convince himself that this time it'll be different, and watch the same problems persist. The American Thanksgiving myth. Does this date actually matter? Let's address the elephant in the room. Does American Thanksgiving actually matter, or is it just a convenient narrative device that gives struggling teams an excuse to panic? The statistic is real. 67.3% of teams in playoff position on American Thanksgiving have made the postseason since 2014-15. That's a strong correlation, and it suggests that teams outside the playoff picture at this point face an uphill battle. But correlation isn't causation. Teams that are in playoff position on Thanksgiving tend to make the playoffs, not because of some magical property of the date, but because they're good teams. They've played 25 games, established their identity, and demonstrated they can win consistently. Conversely, teams outside the playoff picture on Thanksgiving tend to miss the playoffs because they're bad teams. They have fundamental flaws that don't magically disappear in December and January. So, when we see Nashville, Edmonton, and Toronto all making desperate moves around Thanksgiving, we should be skeptical about whether these moves will actually change anything. The date creates urgency, but urgency without strategy just produces panic. Nashville's fire sale won't fix their defensive structure or goaltending inconsistency. Edmonton's goaltending upgrade, if they can even pull one off, won't address their defensive zone coverage issues. Toronto's roster churn won't solve their core construction problems. These teams are making moves because the calendar says they should, not because they have coherent plans for improvement. The asset management disaster across all three teams, what's striking about all three situations is how poorly these organizations have managed their assets. Nashville spent the offseason loading up on expensive veterans, only to watch the entire project implode within months. Now they're trying to sell those same players for whatever they can get, accepting massive losses on their investments. Edmonton has known for years that Skinner wasn't the answer, but refused to address it until the problem became undeniable. Now they're scrambling to find goaltending help, likely overpaying because everyone knows they're desperate. Toronto keeps churning through depth players, never giving anyone time to establish chemistry or find their footing. creating a revolving door that prevents the team from developing any identity beyond talented stars who underperform in big moments. None of these organizations are operating from positions of strength. They're all reacting to crises rather than proactively building championship rosters. They're all making moves because they feel they have to, not because they've identified specific upgrades that will meaningfully improve their teams. This is what organizational dysfunction looks like at the highest level. What should these teams actually do? If I were advising these three general managers, and again, thankfully for them, I'm not, here's what I'd recommend. Nashville, accept that this season is lost. Trade Stamkos and Marchessault to contenders for whatever you can get. Hold on to Yossi and Forsberg unless you get overwhelmed with offers. Start planning for a proper rebuild rather than this half-measure retool that's satisfied nobody. Edmonton, make the goaltending upgrade, but be realistic about what you're getting. Binnington or Jerry aren't saviors. They're marginal improvements who might give you a better chance, but won't fix all your problems. More importantly, address your defensive structure, because even elite goaltending can't overcome consistently poor team defense. Toronto, stop. Just stop. Stop churning the roster. Stop making panic moves. Stop convincing yourself that swapping out depth players will unlock your core's potential. Either commit to this group and give them a full season to figure it out, or have the courage to make the hard decisions about the core itself. This middle ground where you're constantly active, but never actually improving, is organizational purgatory. But none of them will take this advice because it requires patience, self-awareness, and the willingness to accept short-term pain for long-term gain. Instead, they'll make their panic moves, generate headlines, and convince themselves that activity equals progress. The realistic outcomes for each team. Let's game out where each of these situations likely ends. Nashville trades Stamkos and Marchessault for modest returns. They hold onto their core pieces, finish in the basement, and enter the offseason facing even harder questions about whether to rebuild or retool. The veterans they acquire in trades don't move the needle, and the organization remains stuck in mediocrity. Edmonton acquires Jordan Binnington or someone similar, paying a premium because of their desperation. The goaltending improves marginally, but not enough to overcome their defensive issues. They make the playoffs as a wild card, lose in the first or second round, and spend another offseason wondering why they can't get over the hump despite having Connor McDavid. Toronto trades Domi, Carlo, Maxelli, Joshua, and possibly Reilly. The returns are underwhelming. The roster is different, but not better. They either barely sneak into the playoffs or miss entirely. Trey Living gets fired, and the organization enters yet another period of upheaval where they convince themselves that this time they'll get it right. None of these outcomes are particularly encouraging, but they're the most likely scenarios based on how these organizations have operated historically. The broader NHL trade market implications, these three teams being active on the trade market creates ripple effects throughout the league. Buyers suddenly have more options available, which drives down prices. Why overpay for a rental when Nashville is desperate to move multiple veterans? Why give up premium assets when Edmonton's goaltending desperation is public knowledge? Sellers can be more selective about their asks, knowing that multiple teams are competing for similar players. If you're Columbus or St. Louis or Pittsburgh, you can play these desperate buyers against each other and maximize your returns. Contenders can pick their spots, waiting for prices to drop as the deadline approaches, and sellers get increasingly desperate. Patient teams with clear plans will benefit from the chaos these three organizations are creating. The American Thanksgiving panic is real, but smart organizations don't participate in it. They watch the chaos unfold, identify opportunities, and strike when the value is right, not when the calendar says they should. Final verdict. Desperation masquerading as strategy, the trade buzz surrounding Nashville, Edmonton, and Toronto isn't evidence of smart, proactive roster management. It's evidence of three organizations in varying states of crisis, making moves because they feel they have no other choice. Nashville is trying to salvage something from a catastrophic season. Edmonton is finally admitting what everyone else has known for years about their goaltending. Toronto is engaged in their annual ritual of roster panic, churning through players while refusing to address their core problems. American Thanksgiving creates urgency, but urgency without strategy just produces chaos. And right now, these three franchises are drowning in it. The trades will happen. The headlines will be written. The fans will debate whether their teams got better or worse. But the fundamental problems, the organizational dysfunctions, the poor asset management, the refusal to make hard decisions, will persist because changing the roster is easy. Changing the culture, the philosophy, the approach, that's hard. And most NHL general managers would rather make 10 easy moves than one hard one. Welcome to Thanksgiving in the NHL, where the only thing getting stuffed is the trade rumor mill. What's your take on these three teams' trade situations? Is Nashville's fire sale justified? Can Edmonton actually fix their goaltending? Will Toronto's roster churn finally produce different results? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from fans who are living through these organizational nightmares. And if this no-holds-barred analysis resonated with you, smash that like button and let's keep this conversation going. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than comfortable delusions.